Okay, hello, welcome to class number two. Today we'll talk about the actual shape of the letters. So before we talk about what the halacha says about the letters today, it's important to understand where all this is coming from. According to Chazal, all stam must be written in Ashuri script. It's Assyrian alphabet. The Hebrew alphabet that we use today was not invented by the Hebrews. It was used by the Assyrians before Matan Torah. And as a matter of fact, is used to this day by Assyrians who speak Aramaic and write with what we would call Hebrew characters. The parameters for this count are very broad, actually. And even though we have this image from Rabbi Akiva learning thousands of halachas from each kotz, nevertheless, even in Aleph Bet, such as the one you can see in this screen in front of you, would contain those drushes. Maybe not this exact Aleph Bet, but I put a picture of a very simplified Aleph Bet. The changes that the Ashuri script has taken over the centuries between countries in Europe and comparing European styles to Arab country styles, other mistakenly called Ashkenazi and Sephardi nowadays for political reasons. Those differences are stylistic and have nothing to do with the halacha. They are not ma'akiv in any way, shape, or form, and are not important on the halachic sense. Masorah is important, which means basically that we should all do the mitzvahs the way our fathers and grandfathers did. But if you go back several generations, it's going to start getting mixed up and messed up. So there is no important difference between Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Hasidic styles, and different sub-variations within them. Okay, so before I go on to what is crucial in the letters, any questions about my heretical, historical perspective?
Yeah. Um, First of all, I appreciate it. Second of all, there are several pieces in the Gemara and Midrash that talk about how the Assyrian script was on the first Luchos, and that the Phoenician script was on the second Luchos. Do you ascribe to either of those, or is that another?
Oh, the
Does
Gemara,
that have deeper meaning?
Chazal were not unanimous on that.
True. So the Ashur script is derived straight from Ashur, and the original Phoenician script was our own development, or
No,
was that
it's Phoenician. You see,
okay?
the Jews didn't start off with a written language. It was all Baal Peh.
Got
I
it.
highly doubt that the Avos would read and write. If they did, it would probably be in whatever language they would use locally.
Got
I
it.
assume that when Hashem spoke to them, if the concept of speaking actually involves vowels and consonants, then I would imagine it would be in Lashon Kodesh. It stands to reason that it should be in Lashon Kodesh, and it would be very uncomfortable if it wasn't in Lashon Kodesh. Although I don't know what language he spoke to Bilam in, if it was even a language, and what he spoke to Lavan in.
Well, the Nevius is not in a language. Nevius is a form above language.
Either or. There isn't a consensus in Chazal even about that. about what if Nevi'im saw words or if they saw concepts or if
Right.
it dawned on them with siyata dishmaya, or like if and that was called the communication, as it were, because the only thing we can compare it to in our experience is human communication. When Hashem spoke to Adam and he spoke to the Nachash, did he speak to the Nachash in the same language that he spoke to Adam? Okay, forget about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. So let's talk about the few things that really matter in the Aleph. An Aleph in Ashurit is composed of a body with two yuds. The Ari says that sometimes it's two yuds and sometimes it's a yud and a dalet, but it didn't specify where. So people who want to follow the Ari, they modify all their Alephs, which is probably just as wrong as modifying none. Because if he says to modify part, and you modify them all, that's just as wrong as you're half wrong any way you look at it. But they do. So here we are. There should preferably the Yudim have to be connected in the middle as opposed to the ends. That means it should not be an N shape, but they should be connected somewhere along the length of the Aleph. It doesn't have to be the exact geometrical middle. Okay, I'm going to mention the word serif many times, which is easier in the English shir than in the Hebrew one, because in Hebrew I'm expected to say kots or okets or tag, which are sometimes interchangeable and sometimes aren't. And the books that were written on the subject were not very specific. And that leads to all kinds of misunderstandings. But if in English I just say a serif, and you can click the link to see what that means. It's any kind of chukchik on the end of a line that's added for visual purposes. So the Gemara adds serifs to certain letters for midrashic purposes. For example, on the letter bet, so it says it has two oktzim, and one of them points up, because if you ask the bet who created you, then he points to Hashem. And if you ask the bet what is his name, then he points backwards towards the Aleph. Of course, this is a mashal, it's a midrash. Nobody actually talks to letters and asks them. Letters don't sprout a finger in response to a question. But they stand for things and they symbolize things. Okay? Whether these serifs require a ball on the end or not is kind of a moot question. The only place where we see a mention of a ball on the end is where the Tosfot and Menachot says that the Tagim of Shatnez Getz should be like Zions, in as much as they have some sort of head as opposed to being just serif. Otherwise, the words tag and oketz are kind of interchangeable, and they basically mean a corner. They don't even mean a serif in most cases. Okay. The yuds of the aleph have to be bent. Just the line does not constitute a yud. It has to be bent. Now, what if while making that bent yud, it fills in and just becomes a stump? So, according to the Mishnah Berurah, that is a shinui tzura. and fixing it would be Shalokasivra. According to other Achronim, it's not a Shinui Tzora. It's puzzle because it doesn't have the bend, but not to the extent that you can't add it later. And Lemaisa, if it ever happens and you ask a question, you'll be told that you can add it. So that's the Allah. A bet in the Levush, it is described as a dalid in the throat of a vav. The Gemara doesn't say anything about the shape of the bet, but the Levush, which is pretty ancient, 200 years, compares it to a dalid inside the throat of vav. The Yerushalmi mentions the two serifs for the Medrash. So that's all we know from sources about the shape of the bet. We know for a fact that in the time of Rishonim, a bet and a chaf were basically the same except for the squareness. But since the Levush mentions a dalid inside the throat of a vav, and because of the need to make it more easily distinguishable, so nowadays we make a bet with an akev, not just with an akev, but we even make a serif on the bottom, either because of the Yerushalmi or to make the vav more vavish. Although interestingly, the Mishnah Berurah does not require that. The illustrations in all the Mishnah Berurahs notwithstanding. The illustrations in the Mishnah Berurahs were not drawn by the Chofetz Chaim. So
It was drawn by like some later printer? Or?
No, the publishers. Every edition of the Mishnah Berurah gets a copy of the letters from somewhere.
Ah, okay.
So in my edition of the Mishnah Berurah, I added the ekev of the bet and the dalid in gray. To differentiate between the things that are actually illustrating what the Mishnah Berurah says and the letter as we know it today, because if I would draw it exactly the way the Mishnah Berurah says, people would freak out and wouldn't even stick around to listen to the explanation. Okay.
Did the Chofetz Chaim actually draw pictures and like Leonor of Tapach does that with the Rambam? He gets the original ones. Has anybody tried that with the Mishnah Berurah? Should be more recent. It should be easier than the Rambam.
No. And I have reason to believe that the Mishnah Berurah did not even have a mental image of the letters in front of him when he was writing the Mishnah itself. But rather, he was working from text to text. Okay. It's a good tip that Chazon Ish gives to make the back of the bet diagonal so that the ekev won't protrude outside of the borders of the bet and maybe cause a shiloh with a vav or a dalet before it. Maybe that's for practical reasons. Okay, a gimel is made of a zayin and a yud. Sephardi Ktav, it's more like a vav in that the regel comes out of the side, but it's still very much a zayin in that it's square. Some of the Achronim say you should make the right leg of the gimel longer than the left leg for a very interesting reason. Does anybody know the reason? That is so that it won't look like an upside down sari. Kind of as if they would be at the same length. It would be easy to confuse it with an upside down sari, but if they're not the same length, then the problem is solved somehow. It's very hard to accept. Although since it's been printed, we have to give it respect.
But that's all trying to sort of explain the Gemara Menachos about not to make your oisius comparable to other oisius in lists like Gimels and Sadis and Ayins and Aleph and things like that.
People that wrote this had any idea what Gimels and Sadis looked like in the time of the Gemara, they wouldn't have done that. And the same thing with the Aleph and the Ayin. Rashi deals with it very elegantly and saying that it's a matter of the sound, that people would confuse the sound. The Ritva and the Rashba can't accept that. Because they probably don't know what it's like to live in a generation where most people can't read and write.
It's more of a grammatical issue.
No, for us it would be a grammatical issue. For them, it would be, you're telling me, Vayomer, Vav Yud Ayin Mem Reish. Like that, they had no reason to think there's a difference between an Aleph and an Aleph. Okay, deal with Olim Chadashim, deal with kids in Kita Aleph. You'll see they make these same mistakes. Okay. Okay, you know what? This word over here, I'm going to want to fix it. Where here it says if the leg is connected to the body, of course the leg is connected to the body. It should always be connected to it. I'm going to fix this before so I don't forget it. I'm going to get into it anymore. In Hebrew, it works. Imnit chavra yarech laregel. But in English, so how would you say that? You know the Metzias here of the Gimel? Maybe totally. Fused. Okay. I think that's a better, less ambiguous. Rasha, if you're talking, you should press your space, because we can't hear you.
Yeah, and I'm just reading the text as it's as you're saying, it's to try to make sense of what you're saying.
Yeah, totally fused is what would be a better translation. Okay.
Now for Gimel, I think the Shulchan Aruch Harab also writes that it should be square on the top, but I think that the Minig in Chabad is like even the pictures in the Shulchan Aruch Harab has it round on the right top.
The Shulchan Aruch Harab is not consistent with what's called upper and top. Minigay Chabad don't necessarily follow Shulchan Aruch Harab.
Yeah, if you look at the Haras on the bottom, it says it's like we learned a different shape from our Rebbes than like how he paskins in the Shulchan Aruch. And his Shulchan Aruch is basically what the Kesef the Sofer bases his Ksav from. But we see like Chabad isn't doing it.
Yeah, that's for other reasons.
Uh-huh.
but aren't for this context.
Mhm.
Okay. The Dalet is described as being composed of two vowels. So one of the serifs stands for one of the heads of the vav, and the heel for the other. The heel isn't ma'akiv, it has to be at least a sharp angle, although everybody is knowing the heel for them.
I'm not sure what the heel means over here of the Dalid against the um wait, no, there's one vav is like the
On the
vav,
back of the Dalet, the part sticking back,
the part sticking back is
in regular Ktav Ashuri, a Dalet is just a square resh.
uh-huh. Okay, so it's like a resh, but it's a riff, but then it's not a resh because like there's a facing backwards vav. Essentially, that's the second vav there is
Right.
trees. Okay. There's one vav.
Okay, with the Dalet, you have to make sure that the Gag is wide enough so it won't look like a Zion, and that the regal isn't so long that it would look like a Chaf. Obviously, to say that, we're assuming that the Dalet is just a square without an Akev. Okay. Now, according to Rav Chaim Vital, the letters Bedek Chaya have one tag. Now, according to all Achronim, the tags on Bedek Chaya are the serifs. But Sfardim have adopted a more literal approach, and they consider the word tag to mean the same as the three tagim on Shatnez gets. Despite the fact that tag doesn't mean that everywhere else. But in Bedek Chaya, they do interpret it to be a lollipop shaped extra addition besides the serif. So that's why in Sephardic Tav, you will see a single tag on top of Bedek Chaya. And that has kind of spilled over into Ashkenazi Tav too. Because people don't want to seem less medakdek than the next. Okay. According to Keset HaSofer, quoting Shulchan Aruch Harav, you add a serif on the right side of a dalad as well, which is probably a typo. It probably should be left side because it makes no sense and it doesn't even fit in its own context. Okay. The hey. Hey constitutes a dalad with a yud. A space must be maintained between the yud and the roof so that an average person can read it and won't read it as a chet. How much is that? You don't measure it with a ruler. Okay? No, because you're going to see quotes saying that it should be half a kulmus, that it should be, you don't go measuring half a kulmus because there is no measurement for the kulmus. Okay? It just has to be clearly discernible. Now, even the slightest touching between the yud and the gag is considered a shinui tzura, even though probably in the time of Chazal that was considered a hum. There is ample evidence that in the time of Chazal, and maybe even a little bit later, the only difference between Chet and Hey was where it was attached and how thick. But the Heys and Kufs used to be attached.
I just shared a link to the Leningrad Codex, where they have Hayes and Chesses that I underlined. That we can see that they're all attached.
Right. People will say that doesn't prove anything about throwing mezuzahs.
Right. These the Codex as opposed to right. Right, but there's also Gemaras that
But things used to be different. We all know that the olives in the time of Chazal used to be the size of etrogs, and the eggs were about the size of a watermelon. I mean, everybody knows that.
You mean the Sederes?
And the tefach was bigger, and the amma was bigger, even though the doors, left from those days, reach your chin. So somehow they must have been very short with very big hands.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Interestingly, their Yeriot Shlomo is Meko. If there's a very thin line attaching the Nakuda of a hay after right. That means not coming down from the God, but if you wrote the Yud and then he fixed it up and oops and touched and it was very thin, he's Meko for erase. Okay. Does the Yud of a hay have a minimum size? So, according to Ramah, some other Achronim, it should be the size of a Yud. Even though the size of a Yud itself isn't really measurable, if you think about it. If there's no size to the kulmus can be a chicken scratch. So and a Yud has to be the size of a kulmus, so it could be a chicken scratch of a dot. So where's the Yud? So that's not so clear. The Rosh is makes a little bit more sense in saying that it does not have a shiur, not in that it can be infinitesimally small, but in that it doesn't have a minimum shiur per size, but it still has to look like a hay. So if you have a dalet with a nakuda in it that is so small that a tinok will not read it a hay, you can erase that nakuda. And conversely, if you have a hay and the regel is so small that a tinok would read it as a dalet, you cannot make it bigger in tefillin and mezuzahs. No, because the people do make mistakes because of semantics. They say, well, the Rosh says kol shehu nikar, not kol shehu as in Pesach. Okay. What if the yud is not in the corner? What if it's halfway too high or halfway over to the middle? So those would also be kosher, but the chatchila, you should fix them if you can do that without interfering with Hasidim. And the tab of Chaim Vital as in all Bedek Chaya. Vav. Vav is very easy to ruin by making the God too wide. To make the God too wide, it can easily become a resh. So please be careful. Same thing with the regel. It has to be long enough that it should not resemble a U. If the Vav has no bend at the end, it's just a line, even though a Tinok might read it, it's still a Shinui Tzur. As opposed to, for example, an Aleph, where according to most Mefarshim, it's not a Shinui Tzura. You can add it. But in a Vav, you cannot add the head. If a Vav is made with a square corner, it might become a Zayin. How square and what angle is very subtle, and no verbal description will do. So if you have a square Vav, you're going to have to ask a Shaila each time. Because there are other factors besides just zeroing in on the corner. Okay. According to the Ari, the Vav has a serif, and the leg should be tapering down to a point. Although we do similar taperings, not exactly the same. On Zion, and the regals of a Dalet and a Hay, you make it small and then get thicker and then get thinner. That has nothing to do with halacha. That's all stylistic. But in the Vav, the Ari requires it, not for halachic reasons, but because the Vav symbolizes the tzimtzum and how the light narrows down to reach our world, which is more like on the midrashic level than on an actual halachic requirement. Okay, letter Zayin. The head should be square, not a rectangle, because that makes it look very much like a dalet, even if the regal does come out. The corners must be sharp, corners of the head. If they're rounded, it's a tzarich iyun, as we'll see in the letter tet, whether tagin on top of that rounded head would still keep the tzura, or if the head has to be square on its own, regardless of the tagin. That's a tzarich iyun, not something that can be described in a book. Okay. The difference between a zayin and a final nun isn't drastic. So any zayin that's longer than the letters to its right and left constitutes a serious doubt of a shinui tzura, regardless of its internal proportions. So if a zayin is any longer than the letter to its right or to its left, take it seriously and don't assume. What if the leg is too short? Over there, there's reasons to be makel. According to the Pimugadim, even if it's short enough that it would otherwise be a yud, it could be that the fact that it protrudes on both sides keeps it within the definitions of a side. But that's a tzarich iyun kind of thing, and it would depend if the head is any bigger than the other heads of letters, if it's any thinner, if all the letters are exactly the same size, or if they're a little bit up and down, like most people's teeth. So don't be judgmental if it's slightly too short. Take it slow. Okay, think about it, ask if necessary. Chet. Chet is described as being made of two zines with a chutra on top. Now, what is a chutra? According to Rashi, a chutra is a large serif on the left side of the head. According to Rabbeinu Tam, it's that little roof connecting two zines. Truth is that B'diavad, even if you make neither of them, the chet would still be kosher. Although the chatchila, you're going to want to fix it. The length of the legs. If they're slightly longer, no biggie. If they're slightly shorter, make sure that they're at least the size of an ot kana. That would be a yud of the same tav, or according to some makilim, even if one step down, but not two steps down. How much is a step down? That's not defined. So if you have a doubt, if it isn't obviously an ot ktana or obviously less than an ot ktana, ask a shayla. And the Rav will probably shoot from the hip anyway, because there is no objective way of determining how much an ot ktana really is. There is a midrash that the top right corner of the chet should be rounded. Even though the Gemara says that it's two zayins, nevertheless, there's a midrash that it should be round. So make it round. If you have to stretch a letter, so Rashi chet is more easy to stretch, but a Rabbeinu Tam chet, if you stretch it too much, the choter stops being a choter, and at a certain angle is considered as if it were a straight line. So again, did it get that far? You can make them far and make a slightly arched putra, or there's ways around it. But if it looks like it's almost straight, then know that you found one of the extremely rare examples of a chet that became puzzle, unshinui tsura, because the zayin were too long. Okay, I think we'll leave it here and we'll pick up next time. I don't want the sessions to be too long. So remind me that we're on TET in case I don't remember. And let me turn off the recording and you can ask any other questions.